The gunshot that rang out across the plaza of Las Animas, Colorado, wasn't meant for Eleanor Drake, but it changed her life forever nonetheless. She had been standing outside the general store, her traveling bag clutched in both hands, watching the commotion unfold near the saloon when the stray bullet tore through the wooden post just inches from her head. The splinters scattered across her dark traveling dress, and she found herself frozen, unable to move or scream or do anything but stare at the hole in the wood where her skull might have been. "Get down." The voice came with strong hands gripping her shoulders, pulling her behind a water trough with enough force to knock the wind from her lungs. She landed hard on the dusty ground, her bag spilling open, her carefully folded clothes mixing with the dirt of this frontier town she'd arrived in only 30 minutes prior. Eleanor looked up at her rescuer through strands of auburn hair that had fallen loose from her pins. He was young, probably not much older than her own 22 years, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of summer grass. A worn cowboy hat sat low on his head, and his expression was serious as he kept one hand on her shoulder, keeping her down while the shooting continued across the street. "Stay put until it's over," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. She nodded, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs from the inside. This wasn't how she'd imagined her arrival in Las Animas would go. She'd pictured stepping off the stagecoach, finding her aunt's boarding house, settling into her new teaching position at the schoolhouse. She hadn't pictured bullets and dust and strong hands belonging to a stranger who now crouched beside her like a shield between her body and the violence. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it had started. Voices rose in the sudden quiet, men shouting, someone calling for the doctor. Eleanor tried to stand, but the cowboy's hand remained firm. "Give it a minute," he said. "Make sure it's really done." "I need my things," she protested, gesturing at her scattered belongings. "And I need you to not get shot your first day in town." He glanced at her, and despite the tension in his jaw, there was something almost amused in his eyes. "You are new, aren't you? I'd remember a face like yours." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Colorado sun beating down on them. "I arrived on the afternoon stage. I'm the new school teacher." "Well, Miss School Teacher, welcome to Las Animas. It's not usually this exciting." He finally removed his hand from her shoulder and stood, offering her his hand to help her up. "Name's Austin Porter. I work at the Double R Ranch, about 5 miles west of town." She took his hand, noting the calluses, the strength in his grip as he pulled her to her feet as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. "Eleanor Drake. I'm supposed to be staying with my aunt, Mrs. Helen Morris, at her boarding house." "Old Helen is your aunt." Austin bent to gather her scattered belongings, shaking the dust from a blue cotton dress before folding it carefully back into her bag. "She's good people. Runs a clean establishment, cooks like an angel. You'll be comfortable there." Eleanor knelt beside him, retrieving a photograph of her parents that had fallen face down in the dirt. Her mother's face smiled up at her, frozen in time from 5 years ago before the fever took her. She wiped it clean with her sleeve, blinking back the sudden sting in her eyes. "Here now," Austin said softly, noticing her distress. "Everything's going to be all right. The photograph isn't damaged, see, just a little dust." "It's not that," Eleanor said, then caught herself. She didn't know this man, this cowboy who'd saved her life, and was now helping her collect her underthings from the street like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm sorry. It's been a long journey, and I didn't expect such a welcome." "Most folks don't get shot at their first day here," Austin assured her, standing with her bag now fully repacked. "Come on, I'll walk you to Helen's place. It's not far, and I want to make sure you get there safe." Eleanor wanted to protest that she could find it herself, that she didn't need an escort, but the truth was her hands were shaking and her knees felt weak, and the idea of walking alone through this town where bullets flew seemed suddenly terrifying. "Thank you. That's very kind." They walked side by side down the main street of Las Animas, past the saloon where men were dragging out two bodies, past the sheriff's office where a deputy was taking statements, past the blacksmith shop and the land office and the small white church that looked so out of place among the rough wooden buildings. "What brings a schoolteacher all the way out here?" Austin asked, adjusting his stride to match hers. "Las Animas isn't exactly the first choice for educated ladies." "My parents died," Eleanor said simply. "I had been teaching in Philadelphia, but my father left debts. I had to sell the house to pay them, and there was nothing left. My aunt wrote and said there was a position here, room and board included. It seemed like Providence." "Providence with bullets," Austin said, but his tone was gentle. "I'm sorry about your folks. That's a hard thing." "It was 3 years ago for my mother, 2 for my father. I've had time to make peace with it." Eleanor looked around at the town that would be her home now, trying to see past the violence of her arrival to the life that might await her here. "Is it always like this?" "No, madam. Usually it's pretty quiet. We get ranch hands coming in on Saturday nights, raising a bit of hell, but nothing like this. Those two who were shooting, they had a dispute over a card game that's been brewing for weeks. Sheriff Thompson should have locked them both up before it came to this." He paused in front of a 2-story wooden building with a neat front porch and flower boxes in the windows. "Here we are, Helen's boarding house." The door opened before Eleanor could knock, and a woman in her 50s with Eleanor's same auburn hair and sharp blue eyes swept out onto the porch. "Eleanor, oh, my dear girl, I heard the shooting and I was so worried I was about to come looking for you." Helen Morris wrapped her niece in a fierce hug, then held her at arm's length, examining her for damage. "You're not hurt. Tell me you're not hurt." "I'm fine, Aunt Helen. This is Mr. Porter. He pulled me to safety and helped me with my things." Helen's sharp eyes assessed Austin with the practiced evaluation of a woman who'd been running a boarding house for 20 years. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she smiled warmly and extended her hand. "Austin Porter, your mother and I were in the same quilting circle before she passed. You've grown into a fine young man. Thank you for looking after my niece." "It was my pleasure, madam. Miss Drake, I hope you'll settle in well here. Perhaps I'll see you around town." Austin tipped his hat to both women and turned to go. "Mr. Porter," Eleanor called after him. He stopped and looked back. "Thank you, truly." He smiled, a real smile that changed his whole face, made him look younger and more approachable. "Welcome to Las Animas, Miss Drake. Try not to get shot at any more." Then he was walking away, his long stride carrying him back toward the main street, and Eleanor found herself watching him go until her aunt's gentle touch on her elbow brought her back to herself. "Come inside, dear. You must be exhausted. I've prepared the best room for you, and I'll draw you a bath. You can tell me all about your journey over supper." Helen ushered her niece into the cool interior of the boarding house, chattering about the other boarders and the layout of the town, and a dozen other practical matters. But Eleanor's mind was still on green eyes and strong hands, and a cowboy who'd appeared at exactly the right moment. The boarding house was cleaner and more comfortable than Eleanor had dared hope. Her room on the second floor had a real bed with a quilt, a washstand with a porcelain pitcher and bowl, a small desk under the window, and curtains that moved gently in the evening breeze. After her bath, dressed in a clean nightgown, she stood at that window and looked out over the town as twilight settled over the Colorado landscape. Las Animas stretched out before her, a collection of wooden buildings huddled along the Arkansas River, surrounded by vast stretches of prairie that seemed to go on forever. The sky was bigger here than it had been in Philadelphia, wider and more open, painted now in shades of purple and gold as the sun set. In the distance, she could see the dark shapes of cattle on the horizon, and somewhere out there was the Double R Ranch where Austin Porter worked. She wondered if he was looking at the same sunset, if he was thinking about the schoolteacher he'd rescued, or if he'd already forgotten her in the routine of his evening chores. It shouldn't matter. She'd come here to teach, to build a new life, to find stability after the chaos of the past few years. She hadn't come looking for romance, especially not with a cowboy who probably couldn't read past a fourth-grade level and whose life was as different from hers as night from day. And yet, a knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Eleanor, supper's ready, dear." The boarding house dining room held 6 other boarders that evening, all of them curious about the new school teacher who'd nearly been shot her first day in town. There was Mr. Harrison, the land office clerk, a nervous man with ink-stained fingers who stuttered when he spoke to her. Miss Violet Patterson, a seamstress with a sharp wit and kind eyes who immediately offered to help Eleanor adjust any dresses that might have been damaged in her tumble behind the water trough. The Thompson brothers, James and Robert, who worked at the lumber mill and spoke in half-sentences, finishing each other's thoughts. Mrs. Cordelia Walsh, a widow who wore too much perfume and regarded Eleanor with barely concealed suspicion. And Dr. Samuel Fisher, a man in his 40s with gentle hands and a German accent, who insisted on examining Eleanor for injuries despite her protests that she was fine. "Shock can hide damage," he said firmly, checking her pupils and feeling her pulse. "You are young and healthy. This is good. But if you feel any pain, any dizziness, you come to see me immediately, yes?" "Yes, doctor, thank you." Supper was roast chicken with vegetables and fresh bread, far better than anything Eleanor had eaten in weeks of stage travel. As they ate, the talk inevitably turned to the shooting. "Those Garrett boys have been trouble since they hit town," James Thompson said, shaking his head. "Sheriff should have run them out weeks ago." "Are they dead?" Eleanor asked, remembering the bodies being dragged from the saloon. "Both of them," Dr. Fisher confirmed. "They shot each other at the same time. A tragedy, but of their own making." "It's a wild place," Mrs. Walsh said, dabbing her lips with her napkin and looking meaningfully at Eleanor. "Not at all suitable for refined young ladies. I'm surprised your aunt encouraged you to come." "My niece is stronger than she looks," Helen said firmly. "And Las Animas needs a schoolteacher. The children have been without proper education for 6 months since Mr. Peterson left." "Drank himself to death," Violet Patterson added cheerfully. "Not the best example for the children, really." "You'll be a much better influence, Miss Drake." Eleanor felt the weight of their expectations settling on her shoulders. She'd taught in Philadelphia, yes, but in a proper school with supplies and support and parents who valued education. What would she find here? A one-room schoolhouse, she'd been told. Children of all ages, from ranch families and town folk alike. Many of them had probably worked harder in their short lives than Eleanor ever had. "When do I start?" she asked. "Monday," Helen said. "I'll take you to see the schoolhouse tomorrow." "It needs some work, I'm afraid. It's been sitting empty, and the last storm we had blew out one of the windows. But the school board has allocated funds for repairs and supplies. You'll have what you need." "I'm good with repairs," Robert Thompson offered. "James and I can fix that window tomorrow morning, get the place cleaned up for you." "That's very kind, thank you." After supper, Eleanor helped her aunt clear the table and wash the dishes, a routine domestic task that felt soothing after the strangeness of the day. Through the kitchen window, she could see the town settling into evening, lamps being lit in windows, A few people walking the streets in the cooler air. "You're thinking about him," Helen said suddenly. "Who?" Eleanor asked, though she knew. "Austin Porter. I saw the way you watched him leave." Her aunt's voice was gentle, not judgmental. "He's a good man, Eleanor. Honest, hardworking. His family has been in this area for 15 years. His father died in a ranch accident when Austin was 16, and he's been supporting his mother and younger sister ever since." "I wasn't thinking about him in that way," Eleanor protested, but even to her own ears the denial sounded weak. "It's all right if you were. You're young and you've been through a hard time, but be careful. Cowboys are a different breed. They live hard lives, and they don't always settle down the way a woman might hope." Eleanor dried a plate slowly, thinking about strong hands and green eyes. "I came here to teach, not to find a husband. One doesn't preclude the other," Helen said practically. "But give yourself time to settle in first. Learn the town, meet people. Don't rush into anything." It was good advice, sensible advice, and Eleanor fully intended to follow it. She went to bed that night in her clean room with her door locked and her belongings unpacked, determined to focus on her new position, on building a life here that had nothing to do with a cowboy she'd met for all of 10 minutes. But when she closed her eyes, she saw him pulling her to safety. When she finally drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of green eyes watching her under a sky full of stars. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with a breeze carrying the scent of river water and prairie grass through Eleanor's open window. She dressed carefully in a sensible brown dress with a white collar, pinned her hair up securely, and came downstairs to find breakfast already laid out and most of the boarders already eating. After a breakfast of eggs and bacon and strong coffee, Helen walked her niece through town to see the schoolhouse. In the morning light, Las Animas looked less threatening than it had yesterday. Children played in the street, women hung laundry, men conducted business with handshakes and quiet conversations. The bodies from yesterday's shooting were gone, the streets swept clean, as if violence could be erased with a broom and some dust. The schoolhouse sat on the edge of town, a simple rectangular building painted white with a bell tower and a small covered porch. Inside, it was indeed a single room with rows of wooden desks in various states of repair, a large desk at the front for the teacher, a pot-bellied stove in the corner, and a slate board mounted on the wall. One window was boarded up with rough planks, and dust covered everything like a shroud. "It needs work," Eleanor said, trying to keep the dismay from her voice. "The Thompson brothers will be here soon to fix the window," Helen assured her, "and I'll help you clean. We'll have it presentable by Monday, you'll see." They were sweeping the floor when the Thompson brothers arrived with new glass and tools, true to their word. As they worked on the window, Eleanor and Helen scrubbed the desks, wiped down the walls, cleaned the slate board. Other women from town stopped by to help, bringing rags and soap and buckets of water from the pump. Violet Patterson came with curtains she'd sewn, cheery yellow fabric that brightened the whole room when they hung them. Mrs. Walsh even appeared with a vase of wildflowers for the teacher's desk, her manner slightly less frosty in the light of day. By afternoon, the schoolhouse looked almost inviting. The window was fixed, the floor swept, the desks arranged in neat rows. Eleanor stood at the front of the room, imagining it filled with children, and felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with nerves. "You'll do fine," Helen said, reading her expression. "You have a gift for this. I could tell from your letters." "Letters are different from actually standing up here and teaching." "True enough, but you've done it before, in Philadelphia, where the children spoke English without frontier accents, and none of them had probably ever roped a steer or shot a gun." These children need education just as much as Philadelphia children, Helen said firmly. Maybe more. Out here, learning can be the difference between a hard life and a better one. You're giving them a gift. Eleanor wanted to believe her aunt was right. She arranged her few teaching books on the desk. The primers and readers and arithmetic texts she'd brought from Philadelphia, supplemented by the small collection the school board had provided. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. They were locking up the schoolhouse when Eleanor saw Austin Porter riding down the street on a bay horse, sitting easy in the saddle like he'd been born there. He saw them and changed direction, guiding his horse over to the schoolhouse with a slight pressure of his knees. "Ladies," he said, tipping his hat. "Heard you've been fixing up the schoolhouse. Looks good." "Mr. Porter," Helen greeted him warmly. "What brings you to town on a Saturday? Ranch business. Had to pick up supplies from the general store." He looked at Eleanor, and that smile appeared again, the one that changed his face. "How are you settling in, Miss Drake?" "Very well, thank you. Everyone has been most helpful. Glad to hear it. And no more shooting incidents, I hope." "Not so far." There was a pause, the kind that stretched just a bit too long, filled with things unsaid. Austin seemed to struggle with something, then said in a rush, "There's a dance next Saturday night. Town social at the church hall. Most everyone goes. It's a good way to meet folks, get to know the community. I was wondering if you might like to go. With me, I mean. As your escort." Eleanor's heart did a strange little jump in her chest. She was aware of her aunt standing beside her, probably trying not to smile. "I don't know, Mr. Porter. I'll be starting my teaching position Monday, and I'll need to prepare." "It's not until Saturday," he pressed. "Plenty of time to get settled into your routine, and like I said, it's where you'll meet everyone. All the families bring their kids. You'll get to know your students in a relaxed setting." He wasn't wrong, and if she was honest with herself, she wanted to go. Wanted to spend more time with this cowboy who'd saved her life and who looked at her like she was something precious and unexpected. "All right," she heard herself say. "I would like that." The smile he gave her was bright enough to rival the Colorado sun. "Excellent. I'll pick you up at the boarding house, say around 7. Dance starts at 8, but we can walk over together." 7 would be fine. He tipped his hat again, clicked to his horse, and rode off toward the general store, leaving Eleanor standing in front of the schoolhouse with her aunt, who was definitely smiling now. "Not looking for romance, huh?" Helen teased gently. "He's right that it's a good way to meet people," Eleanor said defensively. "The families, my students, of course, dear, very practical thinking." But as they walked back to the boarding house, Eleanor couldn't quite hide her own smile. A dance. She hadn't been to a real dance in years, hadn't been courted or asked anywhere by a man since before her father died and the world had narrowed to survival and worry. The prospect felt both exciting and terrifying. "I'll need to press my good dress," she said, already planning. "The green one with the lace collar. Do you think that's suitable?" "It's perfect," Helen assured her. "You'll be the prettiest girl there." The week that followed was a blur of activity. Monday morning arrived with 23 students ranging from age 6 to 15 appearing at the schoolhouse door, some eager and curious, others sullen and resentful at being pulled away from ranch work. Eleanor took attendance, learned names, assessed reading levels, and tried to establish some sense of order and routine. There was Tommy Larson, 7 years old, who could barely sit still for 5 minutes. Mary and Martha Collins, identical twins of 10 who finished each other's sentences and giggled constantly. Jake Summers, 15 and nearly as tall as Eleanor herself, who clearly thought school was a waste of time and spent the first day glowering at his desk. Little Sarah Chen, whose father ran the Chinese laundry and who spoke almost no English but watched everything with intense dark eyes that missed nothing. By the end of that first day, Eleanor was exhausted, her voice hoarse from talking over the chaos, her patience worn thin by Jake Summers's deliberate defiance and Tommy Larson's inability to focus. She dismissed the students at 3 o'clock and sank into her chair, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. The rest of the week improved marginally. She established rules and consequences, separated the Collins twins, put Jake Summers in charge of managing the stove and firewood, giving him responsibility that seemed to mollify his resentment slightly. Paired Sarah Chen with Mary Collins, who had patience and kindness beyond her years, and seemed to enjoy helping the younger girl learn English. By Friday afternoon, Eleanor had begun to feel like maybe, just maybe, she could actually do this job. The children were learning. Order had been established. She'd even gotten Jake Summers to smile once when she praised his arithmetic work. And tomorrow was the dance. Saturday dawned cloudy and cooler, with the smell of rain in the air. Eleanor spent the morning helping her aunt with household chores, trying not to think about the evening ahead, failing completely. She bathed in the afternoon, washed her hair, borrowed Helen's rose-scented soap. She pressed her green dress, the one she'd brought from Philadelphia that still looked respectable despite its age. She pinned her hair up in a style more elaborate than her usual simple knot, leaving a few tendrils loose to frame her face. "You look beautiful," Helen said, standing in the doorway of Eleanor's room as her niece did a final check in the small mirror. "Austin Porter is a lucky man." "It's just a dance," Eleanor said, but her reflection betrayed her nervousness, the flush in her cheeks, the brightness in her eyes. "Of course it is." Austin arrived exactly at 7, wearing clean trousers and a white shirt that made his sun-darkened skin look even darker by contrast. His hair was damp, freshly washed, and he'd shaved. He held his hat in his hands and looked almost as nervous as Eleanor felt. "Miss Drake," he said, "you look mighty fine." "Thank you. You look very nice yourself." They walked to the church hall as the sun set, turning the sky those impossible shades of orange and pink that Eleanor was learning were common here. They talked about her first week of teaching, about the students, about the ranch where Austin worked. He told her about herding cattle and breaking horses, and the simple routines of ranch life. She told him about Philadelphia, about teaching there, about how different everything was here. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "The city?" "Sometimes," Eleanor admitted. "I miss the libraries and the shops and the symphony on Sunday afternoons, but I don't miss the crowds or the noise or the way everyone was always in such a hurry. Here, people seem to have time to actually talk to each other." "There's that," Austin agreed. "And the sky. You can't see stars like this anywhere else." The church hall was already crowded when they arrived, with families and couples and groups of young people clustered around the edges of the room. A small band was setting up in the corner, 3 men with a fiddle, a guitar, and a harmonica. Tables along one wall held food brought by various townswomen, dishes covered with cloth waiting to be revealed. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm light over everything. People turned to look as Austin and Eleanor entered, and she felt the weight of their curiosity. The new schoolteacher with Austin Porter. Speculation would be running wild by tomorrow, but Austin seemed unbothered by the attention. He greeted people by name, introduced Eleanor to those she hadn't yet met, got them both cups of punch from the refreshment table. The music started, a lively reel that had couples hurrying to the dance floor. Eleanor watched them, watched the way they moved together in the familiar patterns, and felt her stomach drop. She'd been so caught up in the excitement of being asked to the dance that she hadn't considered this crucial detail. "They're starting," Austin said, setting down his cup and offering her his hand. "Shall we?" Eleanor looked at his outstretched hand and felt heat rise to her face. "Mr. Porter, Austin, I should tell you something." "What's wrong?" She met his eyes, those green eyes that had haunted her dreams all week. "I cannot dance," she admitted. "Not like this. I learned a few formal dances in Philadelphia, the waltz and such, but these country dances, I don't know the steps." She waited for disappointment, for him to withdraw his hand, to find some other partner who could move through these reels and jigs without stumbling. Instead, he smiled. "Then we'll sway together under the stars," he said simply. "What? Come with me." He took her hand, not leading her toward the dance floor but toward the door. They stepped out into the cool evening air, into the twilight that was deepening into true darkness. The music followed them out, muffled but still clear. Above them, the first stars were appearing, scattered across the vast Colorado sky like diamonds on velvet. Austin led her away from the hall, around to the side where there was a small patch of grass and fewer people. He stopped there and turned to face her, still holding her hand. "No one's watching here," he said. "No steps to learn, no pattern to follow. We'll just move with the music. Like this." He placed one hand on her waist, held her other hand in his, and began to sway gently to the rhythm of the fiddle carrying from inside the hall. Eleanor felt her heart hammering as she placed her free hand on his shoulder, as she let him guide her into this simple movement that wasn't quite dancing but was something else, something intimate and sweet. She could feel the warmth of his hand through the fabric of her dress, could smell soap and leather and something else that was just him. "See," he said softly, "not so hard." "But you're missing the real dance," she protested. "Inside, you could be dancing with someone who actually knows how." "I don't want to dance with someone else. I want to be right here, right now with you." His voice was low, sincere. "Truth is, I'm not much of a dancer myself. I can do the basic steps, but I'd rather be out here under the stars with a woman who's honest about what she doesn't know than in there trying to impress folks with fancy footwork." They swayed together as the music changed from the real to something slower, a waltz that drifted out into the night. Eleanor let herself relax into the rhythm, into the steady circle of Austin's arm around her waist. Above them, more stars appeared with each passing moment, 1,000 points of light in the endless dark. "Did you mean what you said?" she asked quietly. "That you're not good at dancing? Or were you just being kind?" "Little of both," Austin admitted with a slight laugh. "I can manage, but it's not something I enjoy particularly. Too many rules, too many people watching. This is better. This is just us." "Just us," Eleanor repeated. And something about those words, about the way he said them, made her chest feel tight in the best possible way. They stayed out there for 3 more songs, swaying together in the starlight, talking in low voices about nothing important and everything important at once. He told her about his mother and sister, about the ranch, about his dreams of someday having his own spread. She told him about her parents, about the fear she'd felt arriving in a strange place, about how teaching made her feel like she was doing something that mattered. "You are doing something that matters," Austin said firmly. "Those kids need you. Jake Summers, for instance. He's been heading down a bad road. His father drinks and his mother can barely hold things together. School is probably the most stable thing in his life right now. How do you know about Jake's situation? It's a small town. Everyone knows everything, or close to it." Eleanor thought about that, about living in a place where privacy was limited and everyone's business was common knowledge. It was so different from Philadelphia, where you could live next door to someone for years and never know their first name. "Does that bother you?" Austin asked, reading something in her expression. "The way folks talk and know things?" "I don't know yet," Eleanor said honestly. "It's different. I'm not sure if it's good different or bad different. It can be both," Austin said. "Good when you need help and everyone rallies around. Bad when you make a mistake and everyone knows about it by sundown. But mostly, I think it's good. Means people care." The music inside stopped, and they could hear voices, laughter, the sounds of people taking a break for refreshments. Austin and Eleanor had stopped swaying but hadn't moved apart. They stood close together under the stars, his hand still at her waist, hers still on his shoulder. "I should probably take you back inside," Austin said, but he didn't move. "Probably," Eleanor agreed, but she didn't move either. "Eleanor," he said, and the sound of her first name in his voice made something flutter in her chest. "I know we only just met. I know it's too soon to say certain things, but I need you to know that I'm glad you came to Las Animas. Real glad." "I'm glad too," she whispered. "Even with the shooting and the chaos and not knowing what I'm doing half the time. I'm glad." He smiled, that smile that transformed his whole face, and then he was leaning down and she was leaning up, and their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and questioning and absolutely perfect. It lasted only a moment, just a brush of lips in the starlight, but it changed everything. When they pulled apart, Eleanor could see stars reflected in Austin's eyes. "Was that all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she breathed. "Very much all right." They went back inside then, hand in hand. And if people noticed and smiled, if speculation grew like wildfire through the gathering, Eleanor found she didn't care. She danced the rest of the evening in the hall, Austin teaching her the basic steps of the reels with patience and humor, both of them laughing when she stumbled, both of them glowing with the secret of what had happened under the stars. When he walked her home later that night, he kissed her again at the boarding house door, longer this time, deeper, his hands cupping her face like she was something precious. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "Take you for a drive tomorrow after church maybe." "I'd like that," Eleanor said. "Very much." She went inside on feet that barely touched the ground, her lips still tingling, her heart full of something bright and new and terrifying. Helen was waiting up in the parlor, reading by lamplight, and she looked up with knowing eyes when Eleanor came in. "Good dance." "The best," Eleanor said, and could not stop smiling. The courtship that followed over the next several months was like nothing Eleanor had experienced before. Austin courted her with a straightforward honesty that was refreshing after the complicated social games of Philadelphia society. He took her on drives through the prairie in a borrowed buggy, showing her the land he loved, pointing out landmarks and wildlife and the vast beauty of the Colorado landscape. They had picnics by the Arkansas River, sitting on blankets in the shade of cottonwood trees while the water rushed past. He came to town every Saturday to see her, and sometimes during the week as well, riding in after his ranch work was done to spend an hour or two in the boarding house parlor under Helen's watchful but approving eye. He met her after school sometimes, and the children quickly figured out what was happening. The Collins twins giggled whenever they saw Austin waiting by the fence. Tommy Larson asked Eleanor point-blank if the cowboy was her sweetheart. Even Jake Summers, who rarely showed interest in anything beyond his own troubles, watched Austin with something like approval. For his part, Austin took an interest in Eleanor's work. He listened to her stories about the children, offered suggestions for dealing with difficult students, even helped her repair desks and fix the temperamental stove. He brought her wildflowers and smooth river stones, and once, a bird's nest that had fallen from a tree, empty and perfectly formed, delicate as lace. Eleanor fell in love with him gradually and then all at once. It was in the way he listened when she talked, really listened, like her words mattered. In the way he treated her with respect and tenderness, never pushing, never demanding, always patient. In the way he made her laugh and the way he looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. In the strength of his hands and the kindness in his eyes, and the way he kissed her good night with a restraint that spoke of deeper feelings held carefully in check. By October, 3 months after she'd arrived in Las Animas, Eleanor knew she wanted to spend her life with this man. The knowledge came to her one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch in the cool autumn air, wrapped in shawls and blankets, watching the stars come out. Austin was telling her a story about a stubborn horse he'd been training, and Eleanor realized she wanted to hear his stories for the rest of her life. She wanted to wake up next to him, grow old with him, build a life with him in this wild, beautiful place. "What are you thinking?" Austin asked, noticing her silence. "That I love you," Eleanor said simply. "I love you, Austin Porter, and I don't care if it's too soon or too fast or if I'm supposed to wait for you to say it first. I love you." The look on his face was worth every moment of uncertainty, every leap of faith. "Eleanor Drake," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have loved you since the moment I pulled you behind that water trough. Maybe before. Maybe from the second I saw you standing there, looking lost and scared and brave all at the same time. I love you and I want to marry you if you'll have me." "Yes," Eleanor said, launching herself into his arms with enough force to nearly knock him off the porch swing. "Yes, yes, yes." He caught her, laughing, kissing her face, her lips, her hair. "I don't have much," he warned between kisses. "Just what I've saved from ranch wages. It'll be a simple life, at least at first. But I promise I'll work hard, I'll take care of you, I'll love you every day for the rest of my life." "I don't need much," Eleanor assured him. "I just need you." They were married in November, in the small white church in Las Animas, with the whole town in attendance. Eleanor wore a dress that Violet Patterson had sewn for her, white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, simple and beautiful. Austin wore a new suit that probably cost him a month's wages, and he looked so handsome that Eleanor's breath caught when she saw him waiting at the altar. Helen cried through the whole ceremony. The Collins twins threw rice with such enthusiasm that it ended up everywhere. Jake Summers actually smiled and shook Austin's hand afterward. Dr. Fisher made a speech about young love and new beginnings. The whole town celebrated with them at a reception in the church hall, the same place where they'd first danced, where Austin had taken her outside under the stars and changed her life. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house, Helen having discreetly arranged to be elsewhere, and it was everything Eleanor had hoped for and been nervous about. Austin was gentle and patient, taking time to make her comfortable, whispering how beautiful she was, how much he loved her, making their joining an act of love rather than just physical union. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Eleanor's head on Austin's chest, listening to his heart beat slow and steady beneath her ear. "Are you happy?" he asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Happier than I knew it was possible to be," Eleanor said honestly. "Are you so happy I'm afraid I'll wake up and find out it was all a dream?" "Not a dream," Eleanor assured him, pressing a kiss to his chest. "Real. This is real. Finding a place to live proved challenging." Austin's wages from the Double R Ranch were modest, and Eleanor's teaching salary wasn't much better. They couldn't afford to build or buy immediately, so they stayed at Helen's boarding house in Eleanor's room, which was cramped but manageable. They saved every penny they could, planning for the future. The routine of married life settled around them like a comfortable blanket. Eleanor taught during the week, Austin worked at the ranch. They had evenings together and all of Sunday. They took walks and made love and talked about their dreams. They laughed more than Eleanor had laughed in years. They figured out how to navigate disagreements, how to compromise, how to be partners in every sense of the word. Winter came, harsh and cold, with snow that piled up in drifts and winds that cut through even the thickest coat. The schoolhouse was hard to heat, and Eleanor struggled to keep her students focused when they were all huddled around the stove trying to stay warm. Austin worried about the cattle on the ranch, about the long, cold nights in the bunkhouse, about Eleanor walking to and from school in dangerous weather. In January, Eleanor realized she was pregnant. The knowledge came slowly, with missed monthly courses and morning sickness that left her pale and shaking. Dr. Fisher confirmed what she already knew, examining her with professional detachment while she sat on the examination table in his office, trying to process this sudden change in her life. "You're healthy," the doctor said. "The baby should come in August if my calculations are correct. I want to see you monthly to check on your progress." Eleanor walked home from the doctor's office in a daze, one hand pressed protectively to her still flat stomach. A baby. She and Austin were going to have a baby. They talked about children, of course, in the abstract way of newlyweds who knew someday they'd have a family. But this was real, immediate, terrifying, and wonderful all at once. She told Austin that evening when he came in from work, cold and tired and smelling of hay and horses. "I have news," she said, and the tone of her voice must have given something away because his expression immediately shifted to concern. "What's wrong? Are you sick?" "No, not sick." "I'm pregnant, Austin. We're going to have a baby." She watched his face cycle through surprise and shock and then pure, unfiltered joy. "A baby, really? We're having a baby in August. Dr. Fisher says I'm healthy, everything looks good." Austin swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet, spinning her around the small room despite the lack of space. "A baby, Eleanor, we're having a baby." His joy was infectious, driving away her fear, replacing it with excitement. They held each other and made plans and talked late into the night about names and cribs and all the things they'd need to figure out. "We'll need our own place," Austin said seriously. "Can't raise a baby in one room at a boarding house." "We're saving," Eleanor reminded him. "By August, maybe we'll have enough." "Not maybe. We will. I'll pick up extra work, whatever I can find. Our baby is going to have a proper home." He was true to his word. In addition to his ranch work, Austin took on odd jobs around town. He repaired roofs and fixed fences and helped with construction projects. He worked longer hours, came home more exhausted, but never complained. Every extra dollar went into the jar they kept hidden under a loose floorboard, their growing nest egg for the future. Eleanor continued teaching through her pregnancy, even as her body changed, and some of the townswomen clucked disapprovingly about a woman in her condition working outside the home. But the children needed her, and Eleanor needed the income, so she taught through the morning sickness and the fatigue and the growing swell of her belly. The students were fascinated by the pregnancy. The Collins twins asked constant questions about babies and birth. Little Sarah Chen, whose English had improved dramatically over the school year, drew pictures of babies for Eleanor. Tommy Larson wanted to know if the baby would be a boy so it could play with him. Even Jake Summers, who'd softened considerably under Eleanor's patient influence, offered to help with heavy lifting around the schoolhouse so she wouldn't strain herself. In March, Austin came home with news. "Old Mr. Hendricks is selling his place," he said, excitement bright in his eyes. 5 acres on the edge of town with a small cabin. It needs work, but it's solid, and he's willing to sell it cheap because he's moving to Denver to live with his daughter. They went to look at it the next day, Eleanor's hand clasped tight in Austin's as they surveyed what might become their home. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms, with a leaky roof and broken windows and years of neglect visible in every corner. But it had good bones, a stone fireplace, a well with clean water. The land around it was open and flat, perfect for a garden, maybe some chickens, a place for children to run and play. "We'd have to fix it up," Austin said, walking through the rooms, his mind clearly already planning. "New roof, windows, patch the walls. But I can do most of it myself, and the Thompson brothers offered to help. We could make this work, Eleanor. We could make this home." "How much is he asking?" Austin named a figure that was exactly what they'd saved to the dollar. It was fate, providence, the universe aligning to give them what they needed exactly when they needed it. "Let's do it," Eleanor said. "Let's buy it." The next months were a blur of activity. They bought the property, and Austin spent every spare moment working on repairs. The Thompson brothers helped as promised, along with other men from town who showed up with tools and materials and goodwill. The women came too, Helen and Violet, and even Mrs. Walsh, bringing cleaning supplies and curtains and dishes and all the things a home needed. The cabin transformed under their collective effort, becoming weatherproof and clean and cozy. They moved in on a Saturday in June, carrying their modest possessions from the boarding house to their new home. That first night they sat on the front porch of their cabin and watched the sun set over their land, Eleanor's hand resting on her swollen belly, Austin's arm around her shoulders. "We did it," Eleanor said softly. "We have a home." "We do," Austin agreed, "just in time for our little one." The baby came early on a hot August morning, arriving with a speed that caught everyone by surprise. Eleanor woke at dawn with contractions, and before the sun was fully up, she was in hard labor. Dr. Fisher barely made it to the cabin in time, and Helen had to serve as midwife, talking Eleanor through the pain, encouraging her when she wanted to give up. Austin stayed by her side through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her face with a cool cloth, telling her she was brave and strong and he loved her. And when the baby finally came, slippery and squalling and absolutely perfect, Austin cried as hard as Eleanor did. "A boy, Doctor," Fisher announced, placing the baby on Eleanor's chest. "A healthy boy." They named him Henry after Eleanor's father and Austin's middle name. Henry Porter, born at sunrise on a summer morning, with his mother's blue eyes and his father's dark hair and a cry loud enough to shake the rafters. Eleanor had thought she understood love before. She'd loved her parents, loved Austin, loved teaching. But the love she felt for her son was something else entirely, something fierce and primal and all-consuming. She would die for this child, kill for this child, move mountains for this child. And watching Austin hold their son, seeing the gentleness in those work-roughened hands as he cradled the tiny body, Eleanor fell in love with her husband all over again. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Eleanor took the fall term off from teaching, staying home with Henry while Austin worked to support them. Money was tight, but they managed. The garden Eleanor had planted provided vegetables. Austin brought home meat from hunting. Helen and the town women brought casseroles and offered childcare and filled in the gaps where young parents struggled. Henry grew strong and healthy, hitting every milestone right on time. He smiled at 6 weeks, laughed at 3 months, rolled over at 4 months. He was an easy baby, happy and curious, content to watch his parents go about their daily routines. By the spring after Henry's birth, Eleanor felt ready to return to teaching. Helen offered to watch Henry during school hours, and Eleanor went back to the schoolhouse with mixed feelings of relief and guilt. She missed her students, missed the routine and purpose of teaching. But leaving Henry, even for a few hours, was harder than she'd expected. The children welcomed her back with enthusiasm and a handmade "Welcome Back Teacher" banner. Jake Summers, now 17 and about to finish his education, had organized the whole thing. "We missed you, Miss Drake. I mean, Mrs. Porter," he said, looking embarrassed by his own sentimentality. "I missed you too," Eleanor said honestly. "All of you." Life settled into a new rhythm, busier than before but good. Eleanor taught during the day, came home to Austin and Henry in the evenings. They had dinner together every night, a sacred time where they shared their days and made plans. They made love after Henry was asleep, quiet and careful in their small cabin. They saved money, bit by bit, planning for the future. 2 years after Henry's birth, Eleanor found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, maybe because she knew what to expect, or maybe because she was older and more confident. Austin fussed over her constantly, treating her like she was made of glass, much to her amusement. Their daughter, Rose Helen Porter, was born in December, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's green eyes and a temperament as sweet as her brother's. Henry, now a curious toddler of 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly, to help with everything. "Gentle," Eleanor reminded him constantly. "Be gentle with Rose," and he was, showing a tenderness that made Eleanor's heart squeeze with love. Her children, her family, this life she'd built in Las Animas, this life she'd never imagined when she stepped off that stagecoach 4 years ago. The years passed, as years do, marked by small joys and occasional challenges. The garden flourished. Austin was promoted to foreman at the Double R Ranch with better wages and more responsibility. Eleanor continued teaching, taking time off when needed but always returning to the schoolhouse and the children who needed her. Henry started school under his mother's tutelage, bright and eager to learn. Rose grew from baby to toddler to little girl, sweet-natured and curious about everything. When Henry was 7 and Rose was 4, Eleanor became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder, her body older now, more tired. But Dr. Fisher said everything looked healthy and Eleanor trusted him. She taught through her first 2 trimesters, then handed the school over to a new young teacher, Miss Sarah Chen, who'd been Eleanor's student all those years ago and had gone away to normal school and come back to teach. "You taught me everything I know," Sarah said on her first day. "I hope I can do half as well as you did." "You'll do wonderfully," Eleanor assured her. "The children are lucky to have you." The baby came in April, another boy, Thomas Austin Porter, named for the Thompson brothers who'd been such good friends, and for Austin himself. Thomas was bigger than his siblings had been, with a cry even louder than Henry's had been and an appetite that amazed everyone. "He's going to be tall," Austin predicted, holding his son with practiced ease. "Big and strong." "Like his father," Eleanor said, watching her husband with their children, her heart so full she thought it might burst. They added onto the cabin, building 2 more rooms to accommodate their growing family. The work took months, with Austin and various friends and neighbors helping with construction. The new rooms gave Henry and Rose their own spaces and left the original bedroom for Eleanor and Austin and baby Thomas. Life was full and busy, and sometimes overwhelming. Eleanor taught part-time now, working around her children's needs. Austin worked hard at the ranch, but always made time for his family, for evenings together and Sundays after church, and the little moments that made up a life. They celebrated birthdays and holidays. They weathered illnesses and injuries, and the inevitable conflicts that came with raising children. They grew together, learning and adapting and loving each other more with each passing year. When Henry was 12, he started working part-time at the ranch with his father, learning the skills he'd need to make his own way someday. He was a good boy, responsible and hardworking, with his mother's intelligence and his father's steady temperament. Rose, at 9, helped her mother with the younger children and showed a gift for music, learning to play the old piano that Austin had somehow managed to buy for Eleanor's birthday. Thomas, at 5, was all energy and mischief, constantly exploring and getting into trouble and making his parents laugh even when he exasperated them. One evening in early summer, with the windows open to catch the breeze and the sound of crickets drifting in from outside, Eleanor sat on the porch with Austin after the children were in bed. She was 41 now, and Austin was 43, both of them showing the marks of hard work and good living. Eleanor's hair had threads of silver mixed with the auburn, and Austin's face had lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But when he smiled at her, he looked exactly like the young cowboy who'd pulled her behind that water trough 17 years ago. "You ever regret it?" Austin asked, holding her hand, their fingers interlaced with the familiarity of long marriage. "Coming here, marrying me. This life instead of the one you might have had in Philadelphia." "Never," Eleanor said without hesitation. "Not once, not for a single moment. This life, this family, it's everything I never knew I wanted." "Good," Austin said, bringing her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "Because I thank God every day that you stepped off that stagecoach, that you stayed, that you chose this, chose me." "Always you," Eleanor said. "From the moment you said we'd sway together under the stars." "You remember that night?" Austin asked. "The dance, when you said you couldn't dance." "I remember every detail. Your hand at my waist, the stars overhead, the music from inside, the way you looked at me." "Do you know what I thought that night?" Austin asked. "I thought, this is the woman I'm going to marry. This woman who's honest about what she doesn't know, who's willing to try something different, who looks at me like I matter." "I knew right then." "I knew too," Eleanor admitted. "Maybe not that exact moment, but soon after, when you kissed me under those same stars. I knew you were going to change my life." "Did I change it for the better?" Eleanor looked at him, at this man she'd loved for so many years, and then looked past him at their home, their land, thought about their children sleeping inside. "You gave me everything," she said simply. "Everything that matters." The years continued to pass, as they always do. Henry grew to manhood, fell in love with a rancher's daughter named Alice, and married her when he was 21. Rose became a teacher herself, taking over the schoolhouse when Sarah Chen married and moved away, continuing her mother's legacy. Thomas, showing his father's gift with animals, became a horse trainer, earning a reputation throughout Colorado for his skill and patience. Eleanor and Austin became grandparents 4 times over, with Henry and Alice providing 2 grandsons, and eventually, Rose married a banker from town and had twin daughters. They watched their grandchildren grow, told them stories, spoiled them in the way of grandparents everywhere. As they aged, Austin and Eleanor's love only deepened. They'd weathered everything together. The death of Eleanor's Aunt Helen, the illness that nearly took Thomas when he was 15, the drought year when money was scarce and worry was constant, the fire that destroyed the barn Austin had built with his own hands. Through it all, they'd had each other, and that had been enough. In their 50s, they were still working, still contributing to their community, but life had slowed to a gentler pace. Austin had retired from the ranch but helped Henry with his growing cattle operation. Eleanor had finally stopped teaching, handing the school over to Rose completely, though she still tutored children who needed extra help. They spent their evenings on the porch they'd built together, watching the sun set over land they owned, surrounded by the life they'd created. Sometimes their children and grandchildren came for dinner, filling the house with noise and laughter. Sometimes it was just the two of them, sitting in comfortable silence, not needing words to communicate everything that mattered. One summer evening, when Eleanor was 56 and Austin was 58, they stood in their yard as twilight deepened into night. The stars were coming out, brilliant and countless, just as they'd been that night at the dance 34 years ago. "Dance with me," Austin said suddenly, holding out his hand. "There's no music," Eleanor pointed out, but she was already moving toward him, already placing her hand in his. "We don't need music. We never did." He pulled her close, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers, and they swayed together under the stars just as they'd done all those years ago. Eleanor rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the strength in his arms even now, even after all this time. "I love you," she said, the words as familiar as breathing. "I will always love you." "And I love you," Austin replied, his voice rougher now with age but still sure, still certain. "Until my last breath and beyond. You're my everything, Eleanor, my wife, my partner, my best friend. Everything good in my life started with you." They swayed together as the stars wheeled overhead. Two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd built a life together in the Wild West, who'd loved each other through everything life threw at them. The young woman who couldn't dance and the cowboy who'd offered to sway with her under the stars had become this, had grown into this deep, abiding love that time only strengthened. Years later, when Austin was 72, he passed away peacefully in his sleep, Eleanor beside him in the bed they'd shared for 48 years. The grief was staggering, overwhelming, a pain so deep Eleanor thought it might kill her too. But she had her children and grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren, all of them rallying around her, helping her through those dark days. At Austin's funeral, Eleanor stood beside his grave in the Las Animas cemetery and told the gathered crowd about the day they'd met, about the water trough and the shooting and the dance where he'd taken her outside to sway under the stars. She told them about his kindness, his strength, his absolute devotion to his family. She told them that he'd been the love of her life, her partner in all things, the best man she'd ever known. "He saved me that first day," she said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "And he kept saving me, every day we were together. He gave me a home, a family, a life full of love and meaning. He was my everything." Eleanor lived 5 more years after Austin passed, years filled with memories and family and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. She watched her grandchildren grow and marry, held her great-grandchildren, tended her garden, and every clear evening, she sat on the porch and looked at the stars, remembering. When she passed away at the age of 77, peacefully in her sleep just as Austin had, her family buried her beside him. The headstones stood side by side, marking the resting place of Austin and Eleanor Porter, beloved parents and grandparents, together in death as they'd been in life. On Eleanor's headstone, beneath her name and dates, their children had added an inscription that summed up her great love story. She couldn't dance, so he swayed with her under the stars. Their great-granddaughter, named Eleanor after her, stood at the graves with her mother Rose many years later and asked about the inscription. Rose, now an old woman herself, smiled and told the story of how her parents met, of the dance and the stars and the cowboy who'd won a schoolteacher's heart. "They were so in love," Rose said, her voice soft with memory. "All their lives, from the moment they met until the day they died. That kind of love is rare, precious. They were lucky to find each other." "Do you think I'll find love like that?" young Eleanor asked. "If you're open to it," Rose said. "If you're brave enough to take chances, to be honest about who you are and what you need." Your great-grandmother was both of those things. She admitted she couldn't dance, and your great-grandfather loved her all the more for her honesty. That's where real love starts, with truth and acceptance and a willingness to meet each other where you are. The story of Austin and Eleanor Porter lived on in Las Animas, passed down through generations. A reminder that love could bloom anywhere, even in the harsh landscape of the Wild West, even between two people who seemed unlikely at first glance. The schoolhouse where Eleanor taught still stood, now a museum, with a plaque dedicated to her memory. The cabin where they'd raised their children had been preserved by the family, maintained as a testament to what they'd built together. And on clear summer nights, when the stars were bright over Las Animas, people sometimes told the story of the cowboy and the schoolteacher who'd swayed together under those same stars, who'd built a life and a love that lasted beyond death, beyond memory, beyond everything but the eternal truth that when two people choose each other, really choose each other, nothing in the world can diminish what they create together. The legacy of their love lived on in their descendants, in the values they'd instilled, in the example they'd set. They'd shown what was possible when two people committed to each other fully, when they worked together toward common goals, when they loved each other not despite their differences but because of them. Austin had been a cowboy, rough and simple and hardworking. Eleanor had been a teacher, educated and refined and ambitious. But together, they'd been complete. Their story became the kind of story people told around campfires and at family gatherings, a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the American frontier. It was a story about courage and chance, about honesty and acceptance, about finding home in another person's arms. It was a story about dancing under the stars, about building a life from nothing, about love that endured. And at its heart, it was the simple truth that sometimes all you need is someone willing to meet you where you are, to sway with you when you can't dance, to hold you when the world is scary, to choose you every day for the rest of their life. Austin and Eleanor Porter had found that in each other, and in finding it, they'd created something beautiful and lasting, a love story that would echo through time, inspiring others to be brave, to be honest, to take chances on unlikely love, to believe that happily ever after was possible, even in the Wild West, even when you couldn't dance, as long as you found someone willing to sway with you under the stars.